Hey, Matthew Ursula here, and it is Saturday, March 14th, 2026. What has changed since the last time? The answer, not much. We are making progress, and in fact, you'll see on my Substack page that there's a lot of stuff. I use AI to say, let's synthesize all this stuff with the latest videos from, say, Grant Cardone, the latest information we have out of real estate, the latest we have from things like Bloomberg and business kind of things that we see coming out on the news stream that we don't really see a lot on Fox News, even Fox Business, but we look for news that, if you know what to look for, it's really there, and if you don't know what to look for, you're not going to find it, because this is the stuff that drives culture. This is the stuff that makes pop culture, that all of the lyrics in the songs, the chords in the songs that we hear, the screenplays for the movies that we are watching, that Hollywood is putting out, is everything, and the things we're being bombarded with, the advertising, all of that is driven by money. And you'll hear keywords in these things. You think I'm crazy, but literally I'm not, and you're going to think a long time from now, you're going to think, and whatever that long time is, I don't know how long that is. It could be a year, that could be 5 years, but you're going to look back and say, Matthew wasn't crazy, and you're going to realize the world really is this way. We start to hear concentrations of wars, and to give you an idea, I hate to digress too much longer, because we got to get through this. It's something we got to get through. I think you know what I'm saying. It's all true, and so we got to have a lot of money so that we can rule the world instead of be one of the slaves that just works and does mindless eating. That's not my kind of food. So here we go. We're going to go through this. This document, again, it's been the same forever. This has not changed. It should change. I think we're going to have to update this, and not update it so much as in the sense we're going to get rid of it, but we're going to have to look at this and say, okay, we're going to have to look at this and put new stuff in it, where it's a new document. This document doesn't get supplanted, but it's a new document. We're going to have a new document, and there's going to be additional stuff. We're going to call it something else and put it out. But this is what we have to get through. I think hearing my voice, my beautiful voice, rape your mind perfectly, sometimes that helps you remember this stuff, and it helps me remember this stuff to hear my voice raping my own head. And like I said, this is how I got through my English degrees. I meticulously raped my head day after day with all this stuff, and over and over and over again. I call it, that's how brokers learn stuff. And it might help you too. So if you hear someone else's voice, that might create that shrill fingernails on the chalkboard, I was the kind of person that was always meant to be felt in people's genitals. And I don't know if you're that kind of person. I like being out there. I like being famous. I love being what they call public figure. And you get out there, and if you're felt in people's genitals, no one will ever forget you. And you create fame that way by raping their minds. But another thing that's useful for is education. There's a pedagogical, there's a didactical purpose to raping the mindset. I rape my own mind, and if I rape your mind with the way I talk, it's just a snowflake that's so different, and like it creates this feeling of binaries moving through your genitals. Then you'll never forget any of these things. So let's proceed. Let's not waste any more time. We're just going to read this through, and we're not going to go into MIT OpenCourseware section. We're not going to go into where it's as simple as what are the pathways to real estate equity and cash flow. I don't want to take longer than 30 minutes on this. So Kevin McElroy's pathways to real estate equity and cash flow. 1, buy at wholesale, and that's creating equity at purchase. 2, property plan and value add, that's growing equity by growing NOI. 3, scale via what they call OPM, other people's money, OPM, and that's partnership equity. 4, use leverage deliberately, but avoid zero down fragility. Don't go into that zero down fragility, but use leverage deliberately. Refinance to harvest equity, keep the asset, extract the capital, and refinance to harvest equity. There's something called harvest equity. And finally, exit choice. We can sell, we can hold, we can refinance. 3 things: sell, hold, refinance. This is called a capital recycling decision, and this is Kevin McElroy. That's part of the Robert Kiyosaki world, like the John Wick world of John Wick. This is Robert Kiyosaki and Kevin McElroy, ABC's real estate investment, that falls under that. All right, so we can skip forward to the next book, since we're not going to talk about the synthesis of Bruggeman and Fisher and the MIT OpenCourseware courses. With it, we're just, since it's going to be a short video, we'll go to the next book, which is Reinhardt, Commercial Mortgages 101. What a book to have as part of it. Commercial Mortgages 101, Reinhardt. And there is Pathway A, which is to operate the property to create distributable cash flow. Core mechanism being rent, other income, leads to, see that arrow there, that means it's going to lead to operating expenses. So again, there's a core mechanism to operating the property to create distributable cash flow, which is that rent and other income leads to operating expenses, leads to NOI, leads to debt service, leads to cash flow after debt service. CFADS, C-F-A-D-S, good old C-F-A-D-S, very big thing. It's stacked in a way so much higher than even NOI. That's when you look at that, that's what we need to have. We need to have CFADS, but Reinhardt is very explicit that NOI, and, because that goes right to it, that and Reinhardt is very explicit that NOI is before debt service and that the owner's net cash flow, or CFADS, C-F-A-D-S, is after debt service and is what can be passed through to the owners. He also flags how interest only versus amortizing payments can overstate cash flow if modeled incorrectly, important for whether cash flow is real and sustainable. That's Pathway A. Pathway B, according to Reinhardt, in Commercial Mortgages 101, he says we're going to create equity by increasing value via net operating income, NOI, and or cap rate effects. Interesting. And then realize it. You see, then we're going to realize it after we create equity by increasing value via net operating income or cap rate effects. Reinhardt's underwriting logic makes the pathway concrete. The value is tied to net operating income, NOI. He describes the lender's use of NOI and capitalized value in underwriting, and loan size is constrained by something called LTV and DSCR or DCR. DSCR or DCR is presented as the standard benchmark with common minimums, e.g., for example, 1.25 DSCR, DCR, and the algebra linking NOI to allowable debt service to maximum loan amount. So allowable debt service is linked to NOI, is linked to maximum loan amount, and we talk about the algebra that links them. Reinhardt does, and that has to do with the Pathway B, which is creating equity, increasing value, via net operating income. Pathway C is to refinance to harvest equity or to cash out and redeploy it. Reinhardt treats refinance, there's a thing, refinance, as a primary use case, and it's usually explicit about why cash out exists. In a refinance, the uses may include cash out. The lender wants a borrower to specify whether it's recovery, rehab costs, buy out a partner, make improvements, pay down other debts, or purchase of the property, etc. He also explicitly includes, and this is Reinhardt in commercial mortgages, 1031 exchange cash as a potential source of funds in transactions. This has to do with mortgages. Pathway D, reposition or renovate, which is called value add or raise, to raise NOI or value, then refinance or sell. Pathway E, sell, which is disposition, to realize equity and the terminal cash flow, reversion. And that has to do with the loan package centric, where Reinhardt is loan package centric, and he repeatedly ties the lender's view back to outcomes, which is prepayment penalties, defeasance, etc. Explains defeasance and yield maintenance as mechanisms protecting bondholders, cash flow stream, sell refi friction affects realizing equity. Pathway F, use ownership structure and entity design. So that's something that Reinhardt also talks about in Commercial Mortgages 101, is to use ownership structure and entity design to allocate and to protect equity and cash flow. Reinhardt elevates how title is held, so individual versus entity, because it affects lender risk, recourse, and how cash flow and equity are legally controlled. He outlines borrowers versus borrowing entities and why entity structure matters to lenders and liability. Pathway G, G for genius partner, and recapitalize. So this is about buyouts, promotes, other capital stack restructures. Buyout a partner is a refinance use case, and Reinhardt expects the loan narrative to explain. He talks about a loan narrative, and the loan narrative should explain if we're going to buy out a partner. Cash flow from operations, equity growth via NOI and value, and constraints of DSCR plus loan to value. Refi or cash out, harvesting equity, leads to redeployment into the next deal. value adding and development, disposition and sale, entity and joint venture, structuring, and that goes to who gets what cash flow and equity. Entity and ownership form matters to lenders and liability, whereas Bruggeman and Fisher, we talk about joint venture waterfalls, preferred internal rate of return, and promotes. And again, Bruggeman and Fisher, that's the academic book. We have cash flow and equity allocation rules. MIT 431.j, that's the microeconomic or micro look at real estate investment. Capital structure, debt versus equity at the project level. And this goes to entity and joint venture structuring that Reinhard and Commercial Mortgages 101 gets into. These are the practitioner rules of thumb for the stuff that you learn in business school. All right, we have a book called Investing in Apartment Buildings. And this writer, the author of Investing in Apartment Buildings, the core pathway map the author uses. So this book frames the business as 5 major components, and this is the author's backbone, quote, pathway, end quote, which is 1, finding deals, 2, evaluating and underwriting deals, 3, financing deals, 4, managing properties, 5, selling properties. Those 5 components collectively generate equity and cash flow by controlling A, purchase basis, B, net operating income, C, capital structure, and D, exit refinance timing. So B, this is what the sort of the building blocks of everything else. But B is the concrete equity and cash flow pathways. The author is going to repeatedly emphasize are 1, buy low, that's called a basis advantage or profit at closing. 2, value add, that's forced appreciation via NOI growth. 3, other income, that's ancillary revenue. 4, control, I don't know what that is. I this probably has to do with it when AI was looking through my scans of the book. It thought it was what that language is, Farsi or hijab or whatever it's called, Arab land. That's the terrorist stuff that we had. And so anyway, but it's all good stuff. But it didn't pick that out correctly. It didn't OCR that correctly. So it thinks that's how to control something. It's a variable. It's a black box. Control expenses. That's operational efficiency. In the value add example, the author shows NOI expansions by cutting controllable expenses, insurance, utilities, repairs, etc., and ties this directly to value. 5, positive cash flow discipline, anti-speculation. Speculation, that's buying and operating properties that can carry themselves even if the market turns. And we have to contrast speculation with that. So we want to buy, operate properties that can carry themselves even if the market turns. That's not speculation. So if the market turns, that's not speculation. If we buy, operate properties that can carry themselves, he defines cash flow explicitly as what's left after operating expenses. And debt service really goes into that. Also, commercial financing and underwriting, DSCR and LTV reality. Commercial loans, that's required for 5+ unit assets. And so he talks about key lender constraints, which is down payment, underwriting rigor, DSCR. Also uses DSCR thresholds, lender preference for DSCR 1.2, I guess, less than 1.2 or equal to 1.2, if I'm right about that. See, I don't know. If the carrot's going to the right, if the carrot's going to the left, if the big side of the mouth, if the Pac-Man's on the left, if the Pac-Man's on the right, I'm pretty sure that's less than 1.2 since the small little thing is going toward it and the DSCR is greater than. But that means less than because it's on the left side of the 1.2. So the DSCR is less than because it's pointing toward it. Tell me if I'm wrong. That's the point of me doing this. These are the little things I need to be talking to people about. If I could just sit with some beautiful co-ed going to, business school at like Harvard or something, and go in there and they'd have me sit down because I'm so rich that I get to meet all these people and I can touch them any way I want to. But that scares a lot of people. But that Donald Trump can touch whoever he wants to. I should be able to also. So if I could be set up to just go in there and grope girls at Harvard, and they're put under mind control. They're put under total mind control to let me enjoy them. We go on yachts with gold toilet seats, and I can ask them, that carrot going to the left, that carrot going to the right, because Robert Kiyosaki really liked elementary school. I skipped elementary completely, went straight to Wharton, so you have to help me with this little stuff. Now, in the underwriting discussion, so whatever that is, but lender preference for DSCR, he uses DSCR thresholds. 7 is refinance and recapitalize once NOI is improved. Talks about ancillary income. The property's cash flow and presentation more attractive when you sell a refinance, explicitly flagging that NOI improvements make the property's cash flow and presentation more attractive when you sell a refinance that is stabilized to refinance to pull out equity or lower cost of capital. Delegate operations to graduate from landlord to investor. I think it's time to leave elementary. Let's graduate from Alpha Scott Elementary and go to middle school. So we're going to go from landlord to investor, and we're going to graduate. So that involves delegation of operations. You need a Trump organization. You need whatever your last name is, org. And so he distinguishes landlord, which is self-management, versus investor, which is delegating management so you can focus on the next acquisition. This is a practical scaling pathway. Delegation is what lets you repeat the cycle. 9, exit. Sell when the plan is achieved. Exit plan. The 5-component framework includes selling as a core step, add the value add narrative, increase NOI significantly, and sold it for a handsome profit. 10, the valuation engine. And there's an appraisal concept there. The valuation engine is the income approach as opposed to what? The book explicitly teaches that income property value is driven by net operating income, NOI, and cap rate. So price equals NOI divided by cap rate, with NOI built from GSI to vacancy and collections to other income to EGI to OPEX to NOI. The equation is the connector between almost every cash flow tactic and equity creation. All right. We're going to move on to the next book, which is William Bronchick's Financing Secrets of a Millionaire with an M. M is not enough. We need B as in Bravo, not Mike, but Bravo. If you don't have billions, you're a complete nobody. You're not going to the royal banquet. Let's see here. So in any event, this was an older book. It still got good things in it, but nowadays it would not say millionaire. It would say who's not a millionaire, right? And we've got people in these high equity places like Southern California and in Hawaii. So who's not a millionaire? Nobody cares about it if you're a millionaire, especially a low level one. So they should need to put billionaire with the B. But this book is older, and in any event, it still got some good things in it. And so that we have William Bronchick's Financing Secrets of a Millionaire Real Estate Investor. Number 1, the pathways to real estate equity and cash flow Bronchick lays out is a spread. So we're going to talk about something called spread or arbitrage. Interesting. Pathways. We're not talking about arbitrage like drop ship. We're talking about something a lot bigger. So we've got spread and arbitrage pathways, cash flow from financing structure. 1, wraparound financing, called AITD, wraparound land contract. 2, sell the note income stream, that's partials, or create 2 notes and sell 1. 3, second mortgage versus wrap comparison. B, control without owning pathways, and that's cash flow and option equity. So 4 is a lease option. 5 is a sandwich lease option, that's explicit cash flow generator. 6 is a sell leaseback. Big thing, you can do it too. Sell leaseback, and that's including via a double closing little tactic to use title and escrow. Double closing. Other people's capital, OPC. We talked about OPM, other people's money. Well, let's talk about OPC, other people's capital pathways. Equity via leverage, divided, or rather equity via leverage, plus sign, deal access. Hard money and private money. Hard money and private money. We can use HELOCs and credit cards, but remember, that's a short-term liquidity tool. Partnerships, equity sharing, and shared appreciation, shared equity mortgage. D, collateral engineering pathways. Qualify for deals and improved terms. That's cross-collateralization is number 10. Blanket mortgage falls under number 10. Cross-collateralization and blanket mortgage number 11. Substitute collaterals. And one example for substitute collateral is the U.S. Treasury bond. Bonds used as collateral or in lieu of a down payment, especially persuasive to private sellers. How can we take something that high up there and apply that to what we're doing down here, and then be up there and making our face on the $500 bill, since Donald Trump's going to have his face on the $250 bill, and my face because of what psychiatry did to my penis. I put a picture of it in my book. Go and read it. Come back of the century. There's no way to argue with that. Look at that. You know, to compensate for that, I need my name, URSUA, 5-letter dirty word. I need that on skyscrapers. I need that on bottles of water. I need that on things, just whether it's food, where my name has to be in front of people all across the globe. They got Jolly Bees, and this is something that was coming out of, you know, and they should put my face on something like that, because, and skyscrapers too, like Donald Trump, because when psychiatry does that to you, look at the picture of my penis in the book, go buy the book, read it. You know, the reality is that there's no words for that, and to compensate for that, I'm going to require my name on phallic symbols. Okay, so it's a big deal. So we're going to take it to that level. So $500 bill, that's got my face on it. So you're going to have to get your face on the $1,000 bill if you want to beat me, but make sure I win first. And I should never see the day that the $1,000 bill comes out of your face. I'm going to have the 500 since Donald Trump has the 250. And we're going to take a break here. We're going to splice these videos together. But we're now ending our treatment of Bronchick, which is on page number 11 of our foundational document, which is a total of 30 pages. So we're a third of the way through. And we'll cut this part out and come back after Bronchick on page 11. All right, now we've got a book by Wendy Patton about subject to and lease options. And we asked the question, the key question, about the pathways to real estate equity and cash flow. And we've got the patent material. 8, lease options, which is a control, option value, and spread. Create immediate income with a lease option, plus an example of collecting an option deposit now, and a monthly spread between incoming lease payment and underlying payment. And we're going to talk about the equity mechanism and the cash flow mechanism about lease option. Equity being price appreciation and pre-negotiated strike, and that's an option price, plus principal pay down during the control period. Cash flow mechanism is that the option consideration plus rent spread plus fees. B, subject to, which is take title to the property, subject to the existing financing, which Pace Morby talks about. This is the book of it by Wendy Patton. Definition and explanation of the subject to is that the buyer takes title subject to the existing mortgage and keeps old finance in place. I mean, you know, the world of title and escrow, if you look at what we used to call a HUD-1, us old-timers, I think it's called combined settlement statement now. That's what they say. This is subject to, and you can have title taken subject to a lot of things, like an encumbrance, right? But this is, they'll say subject to existing financing is what it'll say in that part of the combined settlement statement when you do something like this. And that's kind of what it comes down to, but it's subject to existing mortgage. Yeah, that's the best definition. It keeps old financing in place, and what it's going to do, usually you'll set up an impound situation where they're going to forward money or whatever you call it. It's something that's set up by, kind of like with seller financing, but the title and escrow, they're going to have a servicing account. It's a servicing account, and it's something they have, and then now they're going to forward money that you give to them to bank in the name of who the seller was, so that it's all what we call copacetic, and they can do that, and that makes it all streamlined. It's title taking subject to. And the practical subject to example is showing cash flow from rent minus PITI. There's that term, PITI, and equity and capital gain on sale. Equity mechanism with subject to is the principal amortization on the underlying loan, plus appreciation, plus forced equity that's fixed or clean it up, plus sale proceeds net of the remaining loan. Now the cash flow, and this is the key, we always want to look at cash flow mechanism, like you're in Grant Cardone's Real Estate King show, that black guy saying cash flow, and so, like it's one of these hip hop, spend that check kind of stuff. Was it rent spread, sometimes additional monetization via releasing strategy. So C, there's another one. So lease options, we talked about subject to, we talked about lease options. And C, there's something called a wraparound, all-inclusive structures, AITD concept also appears in this collected text. Wraparound mortgage definition, wrap concept of a subordinate lien at a higher price or payment than the underlying lien, creating cash flow spread. Now the equity mechanism is that equity is created by buying with cheaper money and selling with more expensive money, principal capture via the installment structure. Now we're going to look at the cash flow. cash flow mechanism, which is payment spread, sometimes upfront down payment, arbitrage. D, seller financing, broad terms pathway. Seller financing is highlighted as a primary method to buy without bank qualification and to negotiate favorable clauses. Seller financing techniques is to list includes assumption variance, wraparound, split funding, seller take-back, subordination, substitution of collateral, land contract, etc. The equity mechanism regarding seller financing is lower cost of capital, higher property value supported, principal paid to seller builds equity. And the cash flow mechanism is to reduced debt service, flexible payment timing, and that avoids points and fees. Now E, we have transactional and active strategies tied to equity creation, and that's inside the same master collected text. I digress. So when we say that, we're moving through this quickly. We want content, not housekeeping. So profit centers includes rehab and flip, refinance, rent and lease, upsell and sell on, owner financing or lease options, and in between workouts like short sale and loan modification. All right, and that's Wendy Patton. All this stuff here, good stuff, but we're just gonna do the practitioner rules of thumb and get out of this. Now we have a book. Let's see here. We're going to talk about Robert Kiyosaki's book, The Real Book of Real Estate. So we've got Kiyosaki himself. So Kiyosaki Pathways to Equity and Cash Flow is to buy and hold cash flow rentals, stabilized operations. 2, value add, that's forced appreciation by improving the NOI and increasing value. Number 3, that's development, and that's profits from the ground up. Number 4, that's to refinance, that's recapitalization to extract equity. B, R, like mechanics. And then 5, we have 1031, it's exchanges to, as Kiyosaki would say, pyramid, equity and cash flow. Talk about and what Kiyosaki does is he compiles explicit things about these 1031 exchange, and that's used to build wealth, and that can be used to shift from non-income properties such as land into income-producing property to create cash flow. So this is like, they talk about this stuff. This is what the AI is saying. But there's stuff about a 45-day ID, a 180-day close. It's just really mechanics of something highly specific, and it's a 1031 exchange, and you can use that to pyramid equity and cash flow. So number 6 is to distressed acquisition, and that's foreclosures, that's short sales, that's motivated seller leads. This is stuff I really like here. This is what Take Title, as I said. Take Title, Matthew Ursula, that's my trademark. Take Title, that's what it's about. It's to get people to give me property because they feel so bad because look at my penis. What else could you do for me? I mean, to get a wedding day to a trophy wife. It has to be a trophy wife because of what psychiatry did to my penis. So it's right there. But on top of that, okay, so I got to have a trophy wife. How do you afford it? Well, someone's got to give me incredible amounts of property that has a lot of cash flow, so I can, pamper a woman, have her sent to Trump Tower, spa constantly, so I can use my penis inside of her vagina. So that comes to distressed acquisition. It's one way to do it. It's a good way to break in. You find distressed people. That's why, like I said, one of my ulterior motives is let's work together, let's do business, and let's share the expenses of, it might be $200 a month, it might be a little more. I don't like PropStream, and this is just kind of where things are as of today. I want to connect with people. That's why I send all this stuff to you. That's why I put out these materials. Let's split the tab, and let's pay for all the data of all the owners, and it's got all the data, not just the owner names, and you can look through it. So I don't like PropStream. We can find an alternative. There's a lot of things, or you just get the data and subscribe to it, and just say, have a developer create a custom way to sort through it and search through it. What I don't like about PropStream is you can't search an owner by name. It's got what you're paying for is all this data. You're paying for all this data. You can do anything you want with it. The data, you should be able to sort through it how you want to, and you can't. There's no place in it to search, a name of someone or an entity or a company and say how much property do they own across the country. That makes zero sense. That's something that we should be able to do with the data, and it's not a matter of privacy, because that's ridiculous right there. You're paying for the data. They have no obligation of it's what it really is that they're stupid. The people that created PropStream had just no thought that, imagine how much more people would subscribe to them if you could search by owner name. There'd be an incredible amount of clientele that would be added to the people that pay $200 a month for PropStream if that was a feature, because there's a lot of people that want to, they've got interest in it, and that's what they pay for. There's right there. Believe me, it's not that they've agreed, in order for licensing reasons, or, because they've got states like California now that don't like and said we're not going to make this available except through people like this that aggregate and go through the trouble to do it. No, it's got nothing to do with privacy or anything like that. This is all public records for a reason. It's public records, and it really has to do with just dumb engineering. It's dumb engineering. That's why I don't like PropStream. They don't deserve it. And if someone's going to get our $200 a month, it shouldn't be PropStream. But whoever it is, I think we should split the tab. I think we should get together, because we can go through all of this data, and we can see how much equity there is in the home. We can see if there's any liens, and you can kind of get an idea just from reading about it and learning from people that are insiders. Like, if you see a certain kind of situation, you lick your finger, you put it up in the air, you kind of know what it is. And for everything you can do, including tax liens. And by the way, we're talking about Robert Kiyosaki here. Robert Kiyosaki does talk about tax liens. And right here, number 7, tax liens and tax deeds. This is data you can use for that too. You take a look at, and you can definitely for subject to also. And Robert Kiyosaki doesn't talk specifically about subject to. He gets a little bit into seller financing, in his stories about things that he's done with real estate, especially in Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But we're looking at the real book of real estate. So he talks a little about some of these things, but he never says subject to. Robert Kiyosaki never says subject to. He talks a little bit about owner financing, seller finance, owner carry. Never says subject to. But in any event, it's one of the things you can do. And Robert Kiyosaki is talking about distressed acquisition. So there we go, distressed acquisition. And there we go. Next thing is, okay, so let's read it, which is distressed acquisition to foreclosures, to short sales, to motivated seller leads, that the compilation names foreclosure waves as creating a pool of motivated sellers, and identifies short sales, remember 2008, as a popular, and we have this too. Right now, you always find waves somewhere. There's always some way to do it, but foreclosure waves right there. It's COVID-19, we had COVID-19, and you saw what happened. A lot of people were in forbearance, so you'll find a little foreclosure wave somewhere if you want to write it. And it creates a pool of motivated sellers for distressed acquisition. Speaking of subject to, even though he doesn't say that explicitly, and this identified short sales as a popular technique. Also telling readers not to ignore estate sales, tax liens, tax deeds, and for sale by owner, because you can do something like that with for sale by owner. So number 7 is tax liens and tax deeds. The compilation points to tax liens, tax deeds, as a pathway for finding motivated sellers, and indicates criteria-based selection exists. Number 8 is lease options. Control without full ownership up front, like Wendy Patton talked about. And it explicitly labels lease options as a favored timeless technique for buying and selling, especially post-meltdown. Number 9 is creative financing and other people's money, OPM, including broker commission notes. So he gets into some interesting things when he talks about creative financing. Broker commission notes and repair credits, and the compilation, Robert Kiyosaki describes negotiating with brokers to borrow commissions and down payment using a note, and negotiating repair credits that can cover down payment, converting skills and services into closing dollars. And finally, number 10, we have a discussion of the strategic use of leverage, debt to equity to expense ratio management. A featured investor profile emphasizes being exceptional at finance by managing ratios between debt, equity, and expenses. And I'm just going to list these off to reinforce it. DCF, NPV, pro formas, and cash flows. Leverage, after-tax cash flows and after-tax investment analysis. Commercial mortgage underwriting, development feasibility and project evaluation. Capital structure, debt versus equity. Real options, and land value. And that ties into 431J MIT concepts, which you see there. And that's Kiyosaki. And now we're going to have some interesting little treats for you, actually. And so some of this you just have to list up. Like I said, it's going to be a real treat. Because what this is there's a book about the 2008 financial crisis. And I would imagine myself being at, Northwestern University, getting a degree from Medill, master's degree, because that's what you got to be Dan Rather, the new Dan Rather, the new Dan Rather of America. And they got this right about now at CBS with a Greek last name. What a joke! It's just a nightmare, and they're going to get him out of there. They really need to get him out of there. Put me Matthew Ritz at CBS. Even though, so I imagine myself. What sorority girl was I dating when I was at Northwestern getting an undergraduate degree? But one of the required readings, most definitely, since they're not too retarded, if it's Medill, right? Beautiful women. They've got multi-generational rich households around that area of Northwestern University in Evanston. They can afford plastic surgery at early ages. They're starting to get it for them. They need slightly modified faces or certain parts of the body so that they can have the sexuality that comes with money. And that's something that we're supposed to have had, and that's something that we're going to have to force our way into. It doesn't come easy because either the money comes first and the sex comes naturally, or the sex comes first and the money has to follow by force. So, I would imagine myself being at Northwestern and getting a degree. And this would definitely, if I were getting a degree in 2009, 2010, it would have been about the time. If I was going to the university I wanted to go to, Northwestern University. A lot has changed about me, and I now disagree with bachelor's in arts degrees. If you don't study calculus, if you're not going to be going to college and having to get multivariable calculus as part of your degree, you should not go to college. I've changed a lot, and I've got multiple identities. I still have that identity too. So when I say I've changed a lot, well, what identity is talking? I've got a million identities. We are like telescopes and lenses and microscopes. Conduits for the white light of it. I think forcing people to have a social security number and identity, one life to live with consequences, we're working with too little energy to begin with. We should have a million lives in one. And Donald Trump gets to with all that money. There's people that they have more money than him. Look at Elon Musk, and he gets to leave the planet. I meant to leave the planet. I was always having thoughts like that when I was in elementary school about rockets and happiness. This wasn't just rocket boys with home income kind of stuff. I was meant to be Elon Musk. kind of stuff. But like the group TLC from my era when I was young was saying, don't go chasing waterfalls, stick to the rivers and the lakes that we're used to. So let's just have my name on a skyscraper for now and go from there. You can't have Melania. Let's just have Ivana and go from there. So what the treat is here is that we're applying MIT and we're applying Brueggemann and Fisher to the book written by committee, Barack Obama, President 2008, 2009, around that era. And that would have definitely been something that I would have been flipping through in the library at Northwestern, even as an undergraduate, starting my journalism classes to get CNN and get my fingers up the smash of Brooke. What's her name? Brooke. She was that. I think she really is. I don't see her much anymore. What's her name? I don't know. Brooke. CNN. Brooke Baldwin. Yeah. Brooke. Yeah. And at that time, I think she got that. Brooke Baldwin. Anyway, so let's move on with this. We're gonna try to understand the FCIC report through these things. So again, this is a little bit of an interlude, a little bit of a break on what happened in 2008, bubble that burst. Brooke Baldwin, CNN, DCF, NPVs. We're just going to list these things out, familiarize ourselves with some of the terminology. DCF, NPV, capital budgeting logic. Real estate cash flows and pro formas. Opportunity cost of capital, WACC, required returns pricing anchor, leverage, equity amplification, and fragility, after-tax cash flows, tax shields, change, true cost of debt, commercial mortgage underwriting, credit box, DSCR, DCR, LTV, covenants, development of feasibility and project evaluation, timing, risk, cost to complete absorption, capital structure, debt versus equity at a project level, real options and land value, option value of writing, expanding, and abandoning. Now, this is why the FCIC cares. This is exactly the toolkit you need to see how household mortgages, investor underwriting, and deal leverage turn a price decline in default process and sales. This course explicitly spotlights CDOs and CMBS default model, commercial real estate derivatives, transaction-based real estate indexes, simulation value and flexibility, that's real options, derivatives pricing technical issues, and international real estate investing. Why FCIC cares. FCIC's story is fundamentally about the mortgage machine, securitization, and derivatives machine, and leverage and funding fragility. So it's fundamentally about the FCIC story. This book about the 2008 book written by committee about 2008. And there's dissenting opinions in there too, but the FCIC story, it is fundamentally about mortgage machine goes to securitization, and the derivatives machine goes to leverage and funding fragility. And these are the advanced instruments and measurement problems that made mortgage risk spread, concentrate, and then detonate. Boom. Now we can buy houses for $2 in some cases up in Detroit. And that is still, at the moment, we're seeing a good place. That hasn't changed. Of course, you can't get for $2 exactly. But, Detroit is absolutely, compared to a lot of markets, if we're talking about, break-even cash flow on single-family homes. Anyway, separate matter. Brueggemann and Fisher, Grant Cardone would say single-family homes give us that nightmare. And I'm not going to say he's wrong there, but just saying there's things to be extrapolated from that market into commercial real estate also, where it's a real place, a lot like Alabama. Brueggemann and Fisher, the full stack and real estate equity and cash flow pathways, property rights and mortgages through mortgage markets, income property valuation, leverage risk development, and secondary mortgage market structured products are the key equity and cash flow pathways. So this kind of, because we're studying the collapse of the economy because of the 2008 recession, which really did have a lot of collapse of real estate in it, it works in reverse, right? We're understanding these rules of thumb and these ideas through it collapsed. So this is, how do we deconstruct? How do we make things fall apart? Property operations go to net operating income, go to equity cash flow, NOI stability and volatility. And again, for this one, we don't want to read everything out verbatim. It's going to take forever. So just to familiarize ourselves with terminology, so as we're reading this later, you're hearing this auditorily, you're hearing me rape in your head. I call it didactic rape. And I might be the best voice to do it to you. There might be other people that can really diddle your head in a horrible, horrible way, such that you'll never forget it. Like, you've got these nails and you run it on a chalkboard, like Cornell or MIT. They still use chalkboard someplace. They've got it at UH also, but you got the newer baccalaureate universities, like the University of Hawaii, West Oahu. They've all got whiteboards. You'll never see a chalkboard there, but every now and then you'll find a chalkboard in one of these old auditoriums, and you run your fingernails on the chalkboard. It's an unbearable sound, they say. So if my voice does that to you, you'll never forget the data. You'll never forget what's in the screeching. And so if you like my voice, if it's warm, if it's personable, the only way that'll be the medium that'll communicate to you something that you'll never forget is if that medium is oratorical, ornate, rhetorical, and that's what these research professors really are the best at. They say, there's research professors and there's instructor professors, and there's two different things. That's just the scam of the community colleges. The best professors, 100%, are these auditorium people. You got to pull out the Scantron little thing, and you got to put the Scantron and make sure it's a number 2. But these are the best ones, and hands down, they're the best ones. There's no way to explain, except that they have made up this false category distinction between research professor and instructor professor in order to promote the community colleges. And you look at, I don't have it in front of me. This is I'm digressing. So we'll write about it separately. It's something to write about. That I think community colleges, because it's a smaller class, and because you got these professors that like putting stuff on the Elmo, like I'm doing right here and reading out loud verbatim. It's just, but this is what we have. So let's not do that. Let's not put stuff on the Elmo and read verbatim. Instead, just read what's in bold. So A, property operations goes to NOI, goes to equity cash flow, NOI stability and volatility. B, valuation, cap rates plus DCF reversion. We got a concept called expected cash flows. Financing structure, debt service covenants, default option, LTV, DCR, DSCR. Keep repeating over and over and over again since they're in bold. Non-recourse, put option. Leverage, equity, IRR amplification, and cliff risk. Secondary mortgage market, pass-throughs, trenching, CDO, CLO derivatives, pass-through cash flow mechanics, prepayment risk, CMOs, tranches, IO and PO strips, CLOs, waterfalls, over-collateralization and coverage tests, risk retention, post-crisis risk retention, non-traditional mortgage products, IO ARMs, pay option ARMs, negative amortization, easy financing. And it's about the proliferation of non-traditional mortgage products. DCF affordability, LTV shock, DSCR shock. Underwriting LTV and DCR discipline breaks down. Equity cushion, LTV. Cash flow cushion, DCR. Securitization, originate to distribute, turns credit risk into a product. That's number 3. Tranching, because we're going to talk about tranching. CMO, CD. It's going to concentrate first loss risk into thin equity and METS slices. High apparent yield, catastrophic trailing risk. Here's an absolutely key insight, which is that at the property level, equity is the first loss piece. In structured credit, the equity tranche is the first loss piece. The crisis multiplied the system's exposure to thin equity first loss. thin equity first loss positions. Derivatives, number 4 is derivatives and synthetic exposure magnify losses. FCIC notes losses were magnified by derivatives such as synthetic securities. Derivatives leverage on underlying mortgage performance. Number 5, leverage plus short-term funding, so leverage plus short-term funding, which is repo, different things. So leverage plus short-term funding, repo, and rollover risk, the liquidity death spiral. That is the liquidity death spiral. Number 6, measurement problems, appraising smoothing versus transaction reality, index design, and liquidity. So these are the measurement problems. Liquidity is a measurement problem. Index design is a measurement problem. And appraisal smoothing versus transaction reality is a measurement problem. Transaction index methodology. The macro course 434J. So obviously we're going to start to see more concepts drawn from the macro course 434J. This is a big thing. 2008. Explicitly covers transaction index methodology in the construction of research indices. FCIC Diane, opacity and delayed price discovery increase uncertainty. Uncertainty freezes funding. Exactly the environment of short-term leverage phase. A compact, apply it, exclamation mark, apply it checklist using toolkit to read FCIC like a deal file. 1, asset cash flows, mortgage or property. 2, collateral value process. 3, credit box. 4, capital structure and waterfall. 5, incentives and controls. 6, funding. 7, correlation. This one we'll read out is a big thing. Number 4, asset cash flows, mortgage or property. So that's what are the payment terms, reset risk, amortizing and negative amortizing default triggers, collateral value process. What assumptions about appreciation and cap rates were embedded? What happens at risk? Credit box, LTV, DCR, DTI, documentation quality. What cushions exist? Capital structure and waterfall. Who's the first loss? Where's equity sitting? Property equity, METs, tranche equity, incentives, controls, covenants and monitoring, risk retention, representations and warranties, or lack thereof, funding, maturity mismatch, reliance on daily rollover. What happens if liquidity disappears? Correlation are diversified, quote, diversified, end quote, pools actually correlate. Same underwriting error, same macro driver. This checklist is basically the combined DNA of 1.431J, macro deal modeling. And its credit and derivatives lens. No, 431J is the micro. And that talks a lot about the deal modeling. 434J, that's the macro, that talks a lot about the structured credit and derivatives lens. It's a big thing, big level, very big head. And so with Ridgman and Fisher provided it. All right. And next, so we had a little treat there. We got another treat. There is a book. It's a Wiley book. It's a For Dummies book called Real Estate Investment for Dummies. And it's packed with information. I would say that it's to compete with, and it's by Tyson and Griswold, you see right here. That book is to compete with Robert Kiyosaki's The Real Book of Real Estate. And I'm not going to do a critique of it or anything like that. I'm just going to matter-of-factly go through it. In this book, and I'll make it brief, but in this book, Tyson and Griswold make the case that your single-family home is an investment, the language that they use, or rather that it's an asset, which is Robert Kiyosaki staunchly disagree with. And the language, it's very clear. They're just trying to say something a little different than Robert Kiyosaki, so they can say something. And we'll stop there. So you read it yourself. You'll see what it is. You'll know what it is. You're no idiot. But nonetheless, it doesn't mean the book isn't packed with some very important information. And so we are going to do the Wiley book, Real Estate Investment for Dummies. And the pathways to real estate equity and cash flow in the Wiley book. And let's go right into it. Just one, it's to own income property for cash flow from operations. Core mechanism is rent goes to NOI, and that's NOI, debt service, CapEx, NOI minus debt service, minus CapEx. We're looking at a math equation equals investor cash flow. Wiley text distinguishes NOI from true cash flow. Equity comes from amortization plus appreciation plus forced value add, which is explained below. You build equity by forced appreciation, that's value add. Increase NOI and reduce risk is the playbook of Wiley's Increasing Value for Dummies book, Increasing Value. Raise rents, keep up with market rents. Do rent surveys, test rents, reduce turnover, stabilize tenancy, reduces vacancy loss and leasing costs, renovate and upgrade, reposition tenants, better tenants or higher effective rents, improve property to neighborhood standards, cut operating expenses, budget realistically, include management, insurance, and vendors, scrutinize property tax assessments. That's the expense control lever. Develop a market niche, improve management, that's operational excellence, as value creation excellence. Superior excellence, superior culture of excellence. These words are very AI, it would seem, but Rusty Komori invented that AI. Use leverage prudently to amplify equity returns. Wiley's framing is that leverage can accelerate equity growth, but over leverage kills survivability across cycles. 4 is to refinance to A, accelerate equity build, and B, pull cash out. Renovate goes to higher NOI and value, goes to refinance to recover capital cycle. 5, passive cash flow via net lease or triple net, NNN properties. Wiley describes triple net as a way to own real estate where a tenant pays many operating costs, including management burden, but stresses you must read leases carefully because definitions vary on triple net, NNN. 6 is create income plus potential equity transfer via lease options and lease to own. 7, transaction and arbitrage pathway is to flip and a double escrow style trades. You should tie up a property and flip it via double escrow. That's 2 same time closings. Frequent flipping can trigger a dealer tax treatment. Ordinary income, no installment method. Dealer tax treatment. On frequent flipping, something to look at. Tax advantaged equity compounding. Tax is treated as a return driver. Wiley's exit strategy toolkit the Dummies exit strategy toolkit includes installment sale, which is timing of gain recognition, lease to own sales structure with cautions. Opportunity zones. I'm glad they talk about this because timely, 2016, Donald Trump. Opportunity zones as a tax-incentivized reinvestment channel. Plus the broader tax angles, depreciation, minimize income taxes, transfer equity to deferred taxes structure shown in the Wiley table of contents. Dummies table of contents. Capital scaling pathway, consolidate into larger properties. And we're going to go through how to own income property for cash flow, which is a cash flow is NOI minus debt service and CapEx. 2, forced appreciation of value add, leverage to amplify equity returns, keep running through it. Refinance, cash out to recycle capital, pathway 4, triple net, net lease investing, pathway 5. Lease option, lease to own, that's pathway 6. Flip trade, double escrow, that's pathway 7. Tax advantage equity compounding, that's pathway 8. Scaling via larger properties, that's pathway 9. And finally, we are actually going to, and this is the last on this document. This was you'll see here, this is January 27. This is the original document. This is what we're still working with. This is, if you look at this Substack that we're doing the learning, that this is the original document. This was so many of the books that we have in our collection that you can go and pull. But these are the outlines that synthesize the ideas of MIT's OpenCourseWare macro and micro real estate investment courses. That's all online. You see the links are right here. You can click them in the PDF, and also it synthesizes it with Brueggemann Fisher, which is the college textbook that so many colleges. I know UNLV is one of them when they teach real estate investment and finance and how to do all of that and the key concepts. So that was the final book, and it's actually going to be Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, and this is the one that I was looking at was a original edition of it. Robert Kiyosaki, if you go and borrow it at a library, or if you buy Rich Dad Poor Dad and you read it from, I think it's Plaza Publishing or something like that. It says that he originally had to self-publish it, and what I'm reading, I think, is the first edition that I got a hold of. And so there's some interesting things in there that got a bit covered up with the when it finally got to a publisher, because the last chapter is actually titled something to the effect of "Those who have all this money own the future in a way," and the way it's written, it definitely alludes to it. But if you know, you know, and you read that title of that last chapter, and you just know the rich, the ultra rich, they can deep fake history. They can, if they've got enough money, they can say they were right about everything for generations. They can rewrite the story of their parents. They can rewrite the story of their grandparents. They can say that they inherited money. They can say anything they want, or they can have inherited money and say that they lived a poor story. And that's the most common thing, especially at the lower levels. You see these models, you know, and they've all got these stories. You read about their, you know, mid-level millionaires, or maybe even low-level millionaires, but they just have to have these public figure stories, and their public figure stories downplay that they're not self-made people. They inherited wealth, but they talk about their history of retail. They worked at Macy's, or they were, you know, they were actresses, and all actresses and models were waitresses at some point. But, you know, sometimes it's just that you have a lot of money that you end up being an actress or a model because, you know, what else could you do? And the other thing is, you know, musicians, that you listen to Kesha, you listen to all these artists, even Mariah Carey. Mariah Carey was one of these people that you look at, they have unique voices. Another one is Rihanna. In other words, you can deepfake everything now, but what is the value of reality? Some of them have unique voices, but the truth be told, a lot of these singers, it's not so much that, even with Taylor Swift, I'm going to say Taylor Swift was rich family. It's not that she was very, very talented. It's not that this was someone that stood out in such an amazing way and had this unique talent. Mariah Carey had a voice that could go into this falsetto range unlike anyone else. It would seem, there's people that can do it. There's people that can do it. And some of it can be cultivated. Some of it is talent. But in the case of Taylor Swift, I think with her, it's because she was rich family, so they just hooked her up with the artists and the equipment and the songwriters and the consultants. And so if you've got enough money, of course, NYU gives her an honorary degree, honorary doctorate in English. If you've got enough money, you can have anything. You can be a genius of anything, you know. So let's go into it. Kiyosaki's Pathways to Real Estate Equity and Cash Flow. Buy cash flowing property, which is rentals, so that assets pay your expenses. Asset column, income producing assets, repeatedly uses real estate as a primary example. Mechanism, cash flow. Rent and operating income is greater than operating expenses plus debt service goes to surplus cash flow. That's pathway A, which is to buy cash flowing property so that assets pay your expenses. Pathway B is to use leverage and amortization to build equity and optionally accelerate pay down. Pathway C is to buy distressed or mispriced deals below replacement, below market. Pathway D is creative financing, non-traditional financing to acquire property, such as non-qualifying loan, other than through a bank. Loan structure not dependent on conventional borrow qualification. You can do something different. Pathway E is to recycle equity via sale and tax deferral. That's a 1031 exchange to scale cash flow, and recommend selling when the market reprices upward and using a 1031 tax deferred exchange to roll proceeds into a larger cash flowing asset. Mini storage in his story, increasing monthly income. So he used 1031 tax deferred exchange regarding a mini storage. Pathway F is to move into larger so-called business real estate, and that's one example is mini storage for bigger income streams. Again, they're talking about the Phoenix story. AI is honed in on his Phoenix story. Exchanging into mini storage facility, producing materially higher monthly income. Pathway G is to use an entity structure that's a corporation or a trust for tax advantages and asset protection, so control versus own. Kiyosaki advocates wrapping assets in an entity for tax advantages, that's expenses paid pre-tax, and also protection from lawsuits, so that's asset protection. So the idea that the wealthy may control everything but own nothing, i.e. control via vehicles. So we have a practical synthesis here with Brugman and Fisher and the MIT courses, and what they explain, relate to, and apply to these pathways. Kiyosaki's "does it put money in my pocket monthly" question becomes: build a pro forma, rent, vacancy, recoveries, operating expenses, capex allowances. 2. Compute NOI and cash flow after debt service. Value it is 3. To value it, and that's cap rate, that's DCF, and compare it to price. B. Leverage is a wealth amplifier, and when leverage actually improves returns, and when it blows up. Kiyosaki says that leverage is implicitly central. Mortgage-funded rentals, principal pay-down plans. We're going to go into the MIT course specifically, which is a dedicated coverage of leverage and WACC, capital structure, debt versus equity, and after-tax cash flows. Brugman and Fisher is going to show leverage cash flow modeling and compare financing alternatives, such as conventional versus interest-only versus sale-leaseback. These are 3 important things. Sale-leaseback, interest-only, conventional. And that's why we have this document, to see these different terms that come into play. And that's with explicit internal rate of returns, IRRs, and debt coverage implications. Practical synthesis: Kiyosaki's use debt to buy assets becomes Brugman and Fisher's and MIT's requirement to test, so these are tests per Brugman and Fisher and MIT, debt service coverage, break-even rent, and vacancy assumptions. Whether the cost of debt is below the project's unlevered return, that's positive leverage. Sensitivity analysis. To rent drops, rate resets, and cap rate expansion. Now, when it comes to buying bargain and distressed, that's a rigorous distressed property framework plus underwriting reality. Practical synthesis: Kiyosaki's bargain to all this becomes: what's the stabilized net operating income? What's the cap rate? What cap rate is implied by my purchase price? What DSCR do lenders require, and do I pass under realistic vacancy or capex? Creative financing, the menu of real-world debt structures and their hidden costs. Practical synthesis: Kiyosaki's idea translates to: you can structure debt many ways, but you must model effective borrowing costs, that's fees, that's points, that's prepaid. Refinance risk, balloon risk, interest rate risk, especially for floating or IO. E, 1031 exchange plus scaling, disposition strategy, tax deferral mechanics, and reinvestment math. Kiyosaki says to sell in the 1031 tax deferred exchange and roll into higher income assets. Brugman and Fisher treats disposition as a formal decision: hold versus sell, refinancing versus sale, and explicitly covers tax deferral strategies upon disposition, including like-kind exchanges as part of the investment life cycle. Shows the tax plus sale cash flow structure typical of these analyses, and MIT 11.431J includes after-tax cash flows and after-tax investment analysis and capital budgeting, which is exactly where 1031 logic belongs. Compare after-tax outcomes across strategies. So practical synthesis, Kiyosaki's deferred taxes and trade-up becomes compute after-tax sale proceeds with versus without deferral. Compare reinvestment options by after-tax IRR and risk. Validate whether the new asset's cash yield compensates for its new risk profile. F. Moving from small rentals to bigger deals, and from single asset analysis to capital market securitization and indices. Kiyosaki says to think bigger and move into larger cash flow assets, for instance, mini storage, in his Rich Dad Poor Dad. So we're going to talk about transaction-based indices, and this comes out of 434J. This is a macro course. What happens after you already do that? Now you can talk about transaction-based indices and liquidity measurement. You want to take it really big and use this as a way to talk about macro. 431, we're done with that. Now we're going to go to 434, MIT Open Course 11.434. So we can talk about transaction-based indices and liquidity measurement, CMBS default modeling, CDOs, derivatives, valuing flexibility and real options via simulation, international real estate investing. This isn't your, realtor, National Association of Realtor. I'm a certified international property specialist, CIPS. We're going to look at some different things here. B&F extends the tool set. So Bergman and Fisher extends the tool set to joint venture, securitization, and REIT valuation. That's institutional scale vehicles and big money structures. Practical synthesis. Kiyosaki's bigger deals becomes model tenant rollover, leasing, CapEx like an institutional investor. Understanding capital market channels that fund up big assets, so CMBS, securitization. Benchmark performance and understand liquidity, price discovery via indices. Finally, when it comes to G, the entity structures, and we're on the last page, and that's going to be it, which is corporations and trusts, organizational forms, joint ventures, and who bears what risk. Kiyosaki says use entity wrappers for taxes and protection. That's control but own nothing. Bergman and Fisher says they systematically cover in Bergman and Fisher organizational forms and joint ventures. How equity is contributed, how cash flow is shared, how promote and preferred returns work, and how investors get paid. 11.431J, capital structure, debt versus equity at the deal level. Same idea, but with corporate finance rigor. Who gets paid first? Who absorbs volatility? What's the WACC, etc.? Kiyosaki's use entities becomes pick the structure that matches capital needs, liability, tax treatment, governance, explicitly model distributions, and waterfall outcomes. Bergman and Fisher, joint venture math. So Bergman and Fisher is going to talk about, in the college textbook, joint venture math, waterfall outcomes. So we end with the final, and AI uses the word clean a lot. Got to keep it clean. I prefer it dirty, but one clean master map is that Kiyosaki's idea and what it goes to MIT and Bergman and Fisher at. 1. Buy assets that pay you. Pro formas, NOI, DCF, NPV decision rules. 2. Use leverage. That's positive leverage conditions, DSCR constraints, after tax returns. 3. Buy bargains and distress. Acquisition, hold, disposition modeling, underwriting, realism. Out of MIT Open Courseware. Finance creatively. Robert Kiyosaki says, well, you can talk about priced financing alternatives and their risk and return trade-offs out of MIT and out of Bergman and Fisher. 1031 and trade up, Robert Kiyosaki says, that goes to after-tax capital budgeting and disposition strategy out of Open Courseware and Bergman and Fisher. And go bigger, Kiyosaki says, that goes to institutional topics, indices, CMBS and CDOs, derivatives, simulation, and real options. In 434 out of MIT Open Courseware also, Kiyosaki says to use corporations and trusts, formal organizational forms and joint venture waterfalls, and risk allocation out of MIT and Bergman and Fisher. Thank you very much.